welcome everyone. Welcome to the Business and Consulting Super Fair, put on by a host of universities, Prospal and Chartered Accountants ANZ. My name is Richard and I work for Prospal, but I also took my first graduate job as a management consultant. So I'm very, very pleased to be here with Doug, Iris and Marnie to talk about all things management consulting and how you can get ahead and hopefully kickstart your career in this sector. So I might start by asking each of you to introduce yourself and a little bit about who you are, how you got into management consulting, and also what your firm does. Now, management consulting these days can mean so many different things. So if you could just briefly sum up a little bit about what your firm does and how they help their clients. I might start with you, Marnie, if that's okay.
I'm just having issues with my internet, so I might be dropping.
That's all right. We can hear you loud and clear, but maybe I'll go to you first, Doug, and we can come back to you, Marnie, if things improve.
Yeah, sure. My name is Douglas George, and I'm an associate at EY Port Jackson Partners, now affectionately known as EY PJP. And I've been working with the firm for just under 3 years now. Prior to that, I did my undergraduate degree at UNSW in electrical engineering. And whilst I was working there, I was doing, a few internships here and there and studying. And then as I kind of got to the end of the degree, I realized that engineering in its sort of technical sense wasn't for me. I really enjoyed the sort of complex problem solving element. I loved the maths of it. I loved sort of project-based work and that sort of thing, but I didn't quite enjoy being super technical on, kind of specific subjects. And I wanted to be doing work that was more to do with business. And that's why I started looking into consulting. And when I left my undergraduate degree, I joined PJP as a grad back in 2017, and basically got thrown straight into working with a financial services firm on their retail strategy, which was quite a big lateral step for me. But I think to an extent that's what consulting is about. So I spent a bit of time working on that retail strategy, and then spent sort of the next year and a half after that doing more work related to the environment, policy, and sort of government projects in general, particularly to do with energy, but also to do with educational outcomes. And then I took a career break to go to London, and I did my master's in environmental economics. And now I've just returned back to PJP on the flip side of that. So at its core, EY PJP is a strategy consulting firm. And what we do is we focus on solving key strategy problems that are sort of the most pressing issues to senior executives in some of Australia's leading companies, but more recently also at various senior levels of government. And most of the time, our work feeds directly into the decision-making process for senior levels of executives and so forth. So although the work is challenging, I think it's quite a genuine privilege to be able to work on problems, such as what we do.
Fantastic. Thanks, Doug. That was great. Iris, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Pleasure to be here today joining you. I'm Iris Ratley. I'm a director with Nous Group. I've been with Nous Group for about 7.5 years now. Prior to that, I was studying at the University of New South Wales, and I did my undergraduate in psychology, and then I did postgraduate master's and PhD in organizational psychology. And through all of that work, I knew that I wanted to do work in, working with people, working with organizations, solving problems as Doug just described. I also found academic life a little bit lonely at times, so wanted to get into a bit more of a kind of vibrant and dynamic sort of work environment. I wasn't too sure if I wanted to go into consulting, but then I found out about Nous Group because one of my friends did a placement there and it sounded really interesting, a little bit different. I liked what I heard about the culture and the people. And so I thought I'd give it a go and do an interview there. And I've been there ever since. So I started about a week after I submitted my PhD and haven't looked back. I absolutely love it. With my background in organizational psychology, I tend to work on the people projects. So things like leadership development, organizational culture, change management, that sort of thing. But Nous Group itself is a full suite management consulting company. So we do strategy the way that Doug just described. We also do public policy work for government, implementation work, transformation, etc. So the full kind of gamut, big data projects as well. We've got about 400 people around the world. Our head office is in Melbourne, but we do have offices in London and Canada as well, and we're growing in those areas. A lot of our work is in higher education or with government clients. And our kind of purpose is positive influence. So we're quite selective about the projects that we work on. We tend to work with clients that have a similar kind of values alignment to us. And we like to do work that we believe matters and sort of furthers, you know, social issues or other things like that. So yeah, I'm very happy to be here today, joining you, and excited to answer any questions that you've got.
Fantastic. Thank you, Iris. And finally, Marnie's joining us from the recruitment side of the business at Oliver Wyman. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Richard. So my name's Manny, and I manage the HR operations for our Australia business. So part of that is recruitment, and generally supporting our employees throughout their whole employment life cycle, from the day they enter till they end. So I do have a huge part in recruitment, and speaking to you, I guess, entry-level candidates, like most of yourself today. So Oliver Wyman is a management consulting firm, so similar, I guess, to Nous Group. We work across all functions of management consulting. We're a global company, so we've got more than 5,000 employees across the world. A bit more of a smaller presence in the Australia office, but I like to sort of think that it kind of makes it more of a startup vibe. So everyone, you know, knows everyone. We're, you know, very everyone's sort of opinion matters. That kind of really brings that kind of startup culture to the Australia office. And yeah, but we're growing quite rapidly. So we're about 65 employees at the moment, but looking to expand into Melbourne. And yeah, developing quite a lot within Australia. So we do work across Australia and across APR. A lot of the sort of clients that we work in are not only in FS, we are starting to branch out into sort of health, retail, in transportation as well. So yeah, quite a lot happening, quite a lot of diversity in the work that we do as
well. Excellent. I think it's great that we've got such a diverse mix of firms here today, because there is so much to choose from these days in management consulting, and each firm does have a unique value proposition. So it's an excellent group here. The next question I was going to ask is, I want you to take yourself back to being perhaps in your penultimate or ultimate year of university, and you've decided that you want to get into management consulting. You know it's a hard sector to get into. Given that you're here now, what piece of advice would you give yourself back then? I can start with you again, Doug, if that's all right.
Sure. I think looking back on it, possibly one of the mistakes that I made was I was really in my sort of knowledge bubble, if that makes sense. So I was studying engineering, and that was sort of like the universe for me. And I struggled to sort of engage with things that were beyond engineering concepts. Like I would, you know, really care about technology and energy, and that was where I'd like direct all my attention. But I think to be successful as a management consultant, I think you need to have like quite a genuine intellectual curiosity for things that are beyond your sort of realm of comfort. And I think when you're applying for jobs now, it can get sort of quite daunting because you have so many things going on, but you don't want to think about anything else that's sort of auxiliary to that process. But I think it's really important to make sure that you know, are reading widely, engaging with issues that maybe, you know, may not be comfortable for you, and that maybe you may not understand at first go. But I think trying to get into that habit early can be really helpful, because a lot of the times in consulting, you end up on a project or gig that you don't really know much about, and you need to come up the curve quickly. So you need to be, pretty comfortable with engaging with things that may not be too, may not be your like natural knowledge area, if that makes sense.
Very sound advice. What would you say, Iris?
I'm just nodding along because I 100% agree with what Doug just described, especially as someone who came from having just done a PhD, which is where you go very deep into quite a niche area, jumping across to consulting. That was a big kind of jarring adjustment for me. I think a piece of advice I would give is to do a bit of research into different employers. Think about things like, work-life balance, culture, the industries and sectors you're interested in too. It's a very tough job getting into consulting, especially at the junior level. The hours can be intense, the work can be intense, it's intellectually tiring. And so if you find things that you find motivating and that you really love that kind of wrap around that a little bit, whether it's the people and the culture or it's the industries and the sectors that your employer is really strong in, that can help a lot with the motivation and with keeping you sort of engaged and pushing through some of those kind of establishment stages in the early years of your career.
Spot on. Marnie, what advice would you give to current university students?
Yeah, I think, I guess just adding on to what Doug and both Iris said, I guess, attending one of these webinars, that's a great first step as well. I would, suggest, attending as many of these as possible. I know a lot of firms do their own individual ones, which kind of gives you a flavour of their culture, their value proposition. I guess on top of that, I would encourage maybe trying to do an internship with some of the firms that you are thinking of working with. I know that generally kind of gives you a first-hand experience and what, the people like and the kind of work that organisation does. I guess even throughout the interview process, see how you get along with the people that are interviewing you, because generally speaking, they will be the ones that you're working with. I know, when I speak to students or our new hires, that sometimes is something that was that decision factor between a different firm.
That's an excellent point, Marnie. And I think a good segue into the next question I was going to ask. A lot of the time, you might not realize, but the people that you meet in your first interviews, they're not necessarily from, human resources. They might be the colleagues that you're going to work with. So perhaps going back to you, Doug, have you had some experience with recruiting at EY PJP? And if so, could you elaborate a little bit on what if you're screening applications, what are you looking for in a good application to pass them through to an interview?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've been getting through some applications now, as you can imagine. So I have been, doing a little bit of that over the last few weeks. And I am involved with recruitment. I tend to be doing some of the first round interviews at PJP. I think, like when we going through CVs, apart from obviously having good marks and a good academic record, that always helps. But I think a lot of people get into this trap of just sort of laundry listing their experiences and the extracurricular things they've done without really explaining why that actually fits into what strategy consulting is about, and specifically what EY PJP is about. And sometimes when you're reading applications like that, it can feel a little bit generic, and you sort of don't really have a clear sense about whether the candidate genuinely wants to, work in management consulting or not. And I think, my advice for, people who are forming their applications and cover letters now is whilst it's important to apply widely, don't get into the habit of sort of just copy and pasting and just, calling that box tick for your application. I think genuinely take some effort to tailor it to the organization you're applying for, because that really comes through to us. And that's definitely something that we look for and prioritize. Yeah.
Well said, Doug. And I absolutely agree. I wouldn't ever discount the value of writing an original cover letter.
Yes.
Most cover letters do get read. At least I know at EY PJP they get read.
Yep, they do.
And having a real justification in there on why you want to follow this career path just removes a whole lot of doubt in the recruiter's mind.
And
I don't know if that's, sorry,
no,
you go on, Doug.
That's spot on. I think, like, just to add to that, I mean, if you make that proposition very clear, oftentimes we'd even, we generally overlook other things like typos or like little spelling errors and things like that. If all those other things are looked after, like, you make it really clear as to why you want to be there. Whereas if you don't do that, plus you have typos and spelling errors, plus it's a generic copy paste thing, then it's sort of, a bit fruitless.
Absolutely. Is it similar at Nous, Iris?
Yeah, definitely. So we absolutely look for, so as you described, that's sort of, it's sort of a threshold level of, academic achievement, or sort of demonstrate a kind of intellectual curiosity and that sort of thing. That's a requirement for the role. But beyond that, we also look for people who actually demonstrate that they understand what management consulting is, but also that they understand Nous. So things like we probe a little bit about, so what do you know about Nous? Can they actually say a bit about, whether it's our value proposition or our values or the work that we've done? So it accounts for a lot of people come in and say, I actually read on your website some of the work that you've done, and I was really interested in this project. I'm really passionate about this sector, or what have you, because that again differentiates the fact that you're interested in us versus kind of, insert consulting company here type thing. And then Nous in particular, we also look for things like someone who's a team player, because we're quite a non-hierarchical organization. We've got a quite flat matrix structure. So we look for things like humility, team player, etc. A sense of spirit as well. So someone who's got something a little bit interesting in their CV, someone who's got some passion areas, things like that, because that again just sort of aligns to our culture and reasons for being as well. So something that sparks a bit of interest in your CV helps too.
Awesome, thank you. What about you, Marnie? What's required to get an interview at Oliver Wyman?
Yeah, I guess similar points raised. I guess the things that I advise candidates is, not put that pressure on that there is this, one set way that your CV is supposed to look like, but understanding that your CV is going to be driven by your own unique experiences and skill set, and then how you can then demonstrate that you have the ability to have the qualities that we look for in good consultants. So as Iris mentioned, being ability to work in a team. We also look at, if you have drive, and that can be evident in your extracurricular activities, any other part-time work that you had, whether you have the ability to develop analytical and research skills, and also leadership potential. And above all that, your CV should also, address the questions as, why consulting, why do you want to work for Oliver Wyman, and why should we hire you?
Excellent. Okay, so let's talk case studies. For those lucky enough to make it through to an interview, firstly, are you still using case study interviews? And if so, how do they work at your firm? We can mix it up a bit this time, and maybe we'll start with you, Iris.
Yeah, we absolutely do. And we use them in a couple of different ways. So I believe we actually have a written case study that you have to complete before you get to the interview stage. So I think there's a pre-screening process, there's an online assessment, and then there's an actual written case study, which is a take-home case study. You have a set amount of time to do it. You're presented with some information, graphs, etc., and then you have to write up a document. And in that, we're looking for things like analytical abilities, structured writing, clear writing, sound, logic, etc. And then in the actual interviews themselves, we do use case studies too. And sometimes they're more kind of formal case studies where, again, we might have printed information, bar graphs, etc. And so we're looking for things like mental arithmetic, reasoning ability. And also, so the thing that we recommend, and we say this in the interview too, is to talk us through your thinking. Because even if you get the answer a little bit off, or you miss some steps, we're interested in how you process information. Can you think on the spot? Can you work with fresh data, that sort of thing? Can you interpret graphs? So kind of verbalizing and talking through the steps that you're taking is really important in that process.
That's a really good point. I certainly agree with that. When I was conducting interviews for management consulting roles, junior analysts, I would place a lot more emphasis on the process rather than the right answer. I'd rather have the right process and wrong answer than right answer and wrong process.
Yeah.
Marnie, how does it work at Oliver Wyman?
Yeah, I guess generally the same. So our interview process is a combination of fit and case questions. And with the case questions, you're generally, given a problem that you would face as a consultant in your day-to-day work. And then what we're kind of looking for is the way you structure, your structuring, your creativity, your analytical thinking, your quantitative analysis. And on top of that, your presence and the way you communicate your ideas and your information. So it could necessarily, you don't have to get to the right answer, but if you've shown that you can break down the problem and then your thinking is correct, systematical, then that can often make you quite successful into the next round.
Awesome. Doug, what do you think?
Yeah.
Do you think you need to study for a case interview, or should you just back your intuitive problem-solving skills and just give it your best on the day?
I would say a little bit of both. I think it's definitely worth prepping for a case study interview, just so you just have a general comfort with what they look like, how they're structured, how you can start thinking about the problems. But I mean, you probably heard this 4 million times, but don't get locked into what that case study prep tells you to do, because that always comes through in an interview if someone's thinking too rigidly. But yeah, I think that's a really good point about balancing your own sort of intellectual curiosity as well, and backing yourself a little bit on that, because it's, for us at least, I mean, for at least what Iris and Marnie have said, and it's the same for us, which is we do care about your analytical ability and whether you can solve problems and so forth, but also whether you can have a meaningful conversation around a problem. And what are the adjacencies that have to deal with that problem? And in general, like, do you show an engagement beyond just like a rigid case study structure? So I think by over prepping with case studies, you may lock yourself out from having more meaningful conversations that you probably would have been able to have had you not over prepped. So I think, yeah, that's definitely something that we look for in our case studies, just that ability to kind of engage with the case study problem that we're giving you beyond just the analytics of it. So, all that usual stuff about talking us through your process, what's the sort of way that you're structuring the problem in your head, and what are the offshoots of that structure, if that makes sense. But yeah, that was completely agree actually with what Iris and Marnie have said as well.
I hope everyone's writing this down. There's some real pearls of wisdom here. I wish I had attended an event like this before, like recruiting season. Okay, so for those that get through the interview round and they get an offer at your firm and they begin probably this time next year, what's required or what advice would you give to them to make sure they really thrive in their first year? It's one thing to get the job, it's another thing to really thrive and succeed in it. And I might actually pair this with another question that's come through from a student, Jonathan. He's asked, what kind of unique culture fit are you looking for, and what do you value at your firm? So to the extent that those two questions can be answered in the one answer, please have a go. And Iris, I might start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. I'm just thinking back to when I first started. I think there's lots of kind of bits of advice, but if I kind of focus in on a couple of the main things. So one is to expect it to be tough and not allow yourself to get kind of flustered and, flapped and that sort of thing, and we say sometimes that there's a confidence dip. So people come in, they're all enthusiastic, everyone's really generous with their time, people give you extra kind of rope on things. But then once things start to pick up a little bit, a lot of consultants experience confidence dip and really sort of start to question whether consulting's even for them, etc. So I think be patient, take your time with things, put your hand up for help. So at our company, I don't know if it's the same with the others on the panel, but we have a self-managed culture. So we don't always kind of offer help if you don't ask for it, but the minute you put your hand up, people are there to support you and will give you guidance and direction. And don't kind of jump immediately to questioning yourself and your confidence and thinking whether consulting's for you. Just accept that it's going to be difficult in the first year. It's a pretty tough kind of job to get into. I think specifically in terms of our culture, lean into some of the social elements as well. So one of our values is actually care and connection. And so we kind of place a big emphasis on, spending time together socially, getting to know one another on a personal level. So leaning into that element of the culture as well. And that can help in terms of the actual work that you're doing too.
Excellent. Marnie, what advice would you give to your fresh cohort of grads?
Yeah, I guess the advice that I would give is, ask a lot of questions generally, and I'm sure it's probably the same at PJP and Nous Group, but we have the support systems there to help and guide you, whether that be your talent managers or your buddies or formal sort of career advisors. We like to think that the support is there for you, so be proactive, ask questions, feel like you can speak to anyone at any level. That's the culture that we definitely foster at Oliver Wyman. It's like an open door policy. And yeah, I guess if there is something that you are struggling with, generally someone else probably is as well. So, kind of tap into that network and be proactive about it. But yeah, of course, expect it to be difficult. It is a huge transition going from university into full-time work and in a demanding sort of environment that consulting can bring. But equally reward yourself. So similar to what Iris said, tap into that social aspect of work and not take yourself too seriously at the end of the day, which is again something that we kind of thrive on. We like to hire people that are down to earth and don't take their work too seriously. Take their work seriously, but not themselves.
Yeah, very good. It can be a bit of a trap sometimes, I suppose, with a lot of overachievers or competing against each other, and a feedback loop of doubt can begin.
Yeah, I guess something I just wanted to also add is, bring your authentic self to work as well. So try not to, I think diversity is what sets you apart from the person next to you and is very much valued. So bring that to work and don't feel like, there's like a cookie cutter model and you need to be like a set person.
Doug, did you have anything to add? If I get you to comment on this, how has the culture changed at PJP after the merger with EY?
That's a good question. I think culturally we're pretty much identical. So I was away for last year and was expecting to come back to a totally different place, but it's almost identical in terms of the fact that, still a very collegial group of people, all from diverse backgrounds and all very willing to help you and have a conversation with you to help bring you along the curve, and always willing to toss about ideas and discuss things that are interesting. I think culturally with the EY merger, all of that remain unchanged. It's more now that we can kind of tap into a wider network, which we didn't have before. Whereas we used to be just a Sydney-based firm, now we have a presence in Melbourne and in Queensland, and have a wider group of people that we can tap into around the world. So there's now sort of a more tailored career development experience in a way, because you can have these abilities to go work elsewhere if needed and things like that. If I could just add one point to what it just made me remember something when Iris was talking. When I had first joined as an analyst, someone had showed me this sort of comic strip, which was, the first panel was a new analyst, the hair all messed up and like the tie down and eyes looking tired, and the client's asking them what's the answer, and they're just saying, I don't know, right? And then 3 years along the way, you have the same analyst, but all slick in their corporate suits and whatnot, and the client's asking what's the answer, and they're saying, I don't know. Right. And something in consulting is that you just need to kind of get comfortable with not knowing sometimes, but having confidence to know that eventually you'll get there. And that's a sort of the term that was used to describe that to me was almost like a humble confidence. So you're aware that this is a challenge, but confident that you'll be able to get there. And I think that's my advice for people just starting, is to be aware that you may feel uncomfortable and you may feel challenged, but that's okay. And everyone will be there to, your colleagues and the firm is there to help you get through that and progress.
Fantastic. I wish we had more time. There's so many more questions I want to ask, and there's questions coming from students as well. Unfortunately, we've only got half an hour because now the exhibitor sessions are beginning. So there's 80 employers all sitting in video booths waiting to speak to you. Some of them are running agendas, so check the agendas tab on the virtual fair hub to see what they're doing in each half an hour block. Before we break, a quick final sentence from each of you about why students on this call should apply at your firm. And I'll start with Marnie again.
Sure. I guess, our key sort of selling points are, if you do decide to for a while and are successful, you'll have immediate impact and continuously be challenged throughout your career. So you'll be, very much part of the project team from day one, have connections or interactions with senior clients and senior members of the project team from very early on in your career. We very much believe that we don't have a one-size-fits-all model. You chart your own employment course, and we support the journey. So whether that's, taking some flexibility options in terms of your career, anything that you want to specialize in, we're very much supportive on that. And yeah, we very much support diversity and bringing your authentic self to work. Yeah, I guess that's my quick spiel.
Fantastic. Doug, one sentence.
Yep. Working at EY-PJP, you will genuinely get access to solving some of Australia's most complex problems, both for businesses and for the government. And you'll be able to do it in a firm that has a boutique feel, but also has global reach, if that makes sense. And because of that, your career development trajectory will be very tailored to what your needs and your requirements are, and also what your interests are.
Very good. And Iris, final word.
Awesome. I think it's a bit of a differentiator. We're a relatively smaller company, but we are growing rapidly. We've been growing every year since we were founded. So I think that makes us a very dynamic organization with a lot of opportunities for people who join. You can work across all different types of projects, sectors, different teams, national and international teams. And NOUS is always doing new and interesting things. And we've got a fantastic culture as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Doug, Iris, and Marnie. This has been excellent. I've actually learned a lot during this, and I wish I could have attended something like this when I was still a student. Thank you to everyone that joined this session. Please go and jump into the employer booths and see what each of the individual firms are having to say. And best of luck with applications.